Hello. Right, we'll now carry on from yesterday's reading. This is chapter 3, and I'll begin. Whitehall. The Foreign Secretary, Douglas Hurd, was shown into the inner office of Tom King, the Secretary of State for Defence. The room was well furnished and deeply carpeted. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, and various prints and photographs of action, soldiers, and uniformed men adorned the walls. They had an odd reflective light due to the armoured glass in place at the windows, present ever since previous IRA attacks and threats. The man dubbed by the press as Mr. Whippy, because of his shock of wavy white hair, walked across the deep carpet with his usual customary erect bearing, adjusting his thick, dark spectacles in a habitual manner, slightly apprehensive about this meeting with his counterpart in defence. The two men had been at Cambridge together, and, although friends, if ever that could be said of colleagues in the political arena, Hurd was acutely aware of the ramifications of what was about to be discussed, and the news that he had to impart was not good. Tom King rose as Hurd entered, and came around his desk, a genuine smile of warmth welcome on his florid face. He did not look well, and the responsibility of the last 3 months of the Gulf situation had clearly taken its toll. Hurd noticed that behind the horn-rimmed spectacles more lines had appeared, and the sandy hair now had small flashes of grey appearing at the temples. "Douglas, good to see you," he said, shaking hands warmly with Hurd, and indicating a circular table surrounded by armchairs to his right. He motioned for him to sit, and, "Thank you for coming over. It's hectic at the moment. Saddam appears to be fighting on as he's now invaded Kuwait, and has plans for the Saudi oil fields. I don't think he will succeed, but you never know." He left the sentence hanging in the air with a knowing shrug of his shoulders, and a slight infection of his native Devon burr still evident in his speech. Hurd accepted with a smile, a polite, deprecative wave of his hand, and a muttering of "not all." Both career politicians, the two men knew this was not going to be an easy meeting. Tea, previously set out on the circular antique table, was offered, accepted, and poured, with each man partaking of the time-honoured ritual of civilised diplomacy. The ticking of the clock above the beautifully carved, ornate fireplace filled the short silence. As a preamble, Hurd asked after the true position in the Middle East. "It is going well," was the taut reply, if war can ever be said to be going well. "However, my main concern is the Americans." At which Hurd raised his eyebrows, indicating he was very interested to hear more. "I have a very uncomfortable feeling they do not want to finish the job. The indications I am getting would seem to point to the fact that if they try to take back Kuwait, which now seems inevitable, they wish to stop at the gates of Baghdad and leave Saddam in place as a puppet dictator, with them pulling the strings." Hurd nodded, as though this was no surprise to him. "Yes, well, I've heard similar intelligence to that effect from my department. It is all down to the oil rights, of course. When is it not in the Middle East?" he questioned rhetorically. He continued, "The Americans are probably one of the largest consumers of oil in the world, and the political masters over there need to keep it cheap to keep their voting public happy. It is, I'm afraid, a familiar story, and one that will shape the politics and power of that region for now and the foreseeable future. We all know that if the only commodity in the Middle East region was sand and a few camels, the Americans wouldn't give a damn about who did what to whom and why. However, this brings me on to why I wanted to speak to you. In a way, is, I suspect, potentially related." "Go on," King offered, a worrying frown appearing upon his face. "As you are aware, we have been keeping close tabs upon Argentina since the Falklands War. We have 2 very good MI6 operatives there, attached to the embassy, who are picking up information which is starting to give us cause for concern. Both Humphrey Maude, the British ambassador, and the military attaché, Squadron Leader Dorset, have raised their own concerns, and we do not want a repeat of the situation in 1983, where, you may recall, the then military attaché raised concern in the strongest tones that we should take seriously the verbal threats being voiced by the Argentinian government. They were ignored at first, and it was not until they occupied Georgia that we took the threat seriously." King considered this information, pulled a file from the right-hand side of his desk. He rotated it and passed the document over to Hurd. "This is the latest report from Morden Dorset. It bears out your suspicions. You will see there is nothing concrete, no build-up we can see, and indeed, where would they get the funds? Never mind the physical armament. They never rearmed after the Falklands conflict. That was not any way in which they could. They were, and still are to a certain extent, a broken nation, both militarily and fiscally. The problem we have, of course, is that diplomatic relations were only restored earlier this year, with a token foothold care of the Swiss embassy keeping the door open for us. So no diplomatic staff, no receptions, and more importantly, every member of HMG looked upon with suspicion and resentment. No possible chance of moving freely, and certainly nowhere near military bases. If, by some miracle they had or have, found the financial wherewithal to rearm, we have no reasonable excuse to go wandering around the country checking, and we don't want another William Cross on our hands." He finished, making reference to the British military attaché to Es Salam, who had recently been caught taking photographs of military and nuclear installations before being caught and expelled for spying. "Yes, quite," mused King, thinking of the furore and embarrassment that the incident had caused. "Well, what do you propose to do?" "I'm waiting to hear back from Dorset, who currently has one of the 2 Six operatives, Andrew Waddington, following up a lead. In the meantime, I've arranged for a meeting of the Security Council to put forward a proposal based upon what we learn in due course. We have someone in mind who may be able to move freely and yet be able to pass information." Hurd carefully outlined his plan in more detail to his opposite number in defence. The meeting ended, and each wished the other good day. Douglas Hurd left the building deep in thought, and considered what they had discussed over the last half an hour whilst travelling back to King Charles Street. Not good, he mused himself, not good at all.